Welcome back to Power Lunch, everybody. North Korea launching 4 more missiles yesterday as that country aggressively moves forward with its nuclear program. But it begs the question, how does a poor country afford something as expensive as a nuclear weapons program? Where does the money come from? A report out of the UN today is providing new evidence on how the country makes a lot of money flouting UN sanctions, often with the help of the Chinese. And Michelle, what a weekend you had reading this report, and there it is.
Report. Yeah, it's super interesting. I highly recommend it. New report details how North Korea is making millions by selling arms to countries in Africa and the Middle East, and also billions selling coal and iron ore to China. One example, a ship seized by Egypt in the Suez Canal was carrying a shipment of 30,000 rocket-propelled grenades from North Korea. Destination unclear. They're in those crates underneath that tarp, underneath that dirt. Also, the report shows the country sells various armaments through a company called GLOCOM, short for Global Communications. The company advertises on the internet and makes almost no efforts to hide its North Korean origins. And there are many front companies like GLOCOM in the report which are registered in Malaysia or China in order to minimally try and hide their North Korean roots. North Korean diplomats have been repeatedly caught smuggling banned luxury goods such as gold bars, cash, watches, even this Bentley. Investigators also discovered that SWIFT, the international payment system, is still processing transactions for North Korean banks, even though some of them are supposed to be prohibited from using the global financial system. I've reached out to SWIFT and I'm waiting for an explanation. But in North Korea's biggest influx of cash, more than $1 billion, comes from selling coal and iron ore to China. China's promised to curtail those purchases more than once, but it hasn't happened. The UN has asked China for an explanation. So what should be done by the Trump administration in the face of the missile launches and this report? Joining us now is Anthony Ruggiero. He's with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a former Treasury officer. Good to have you here, Anthony.
Thanks for having me.
So the bigger issue is what to do about China and the fact that they seem tacitly complicit. But honestly, reading this report, I wasn't surprised by the China angle. What surprised me far more was SWIFT, an organization that our audience is very familiar with and came to know because of the Iran sanctions situation. I was startled to read they're still processing payments for North Korea. Were you as startled by that?
Yes, definitely. It was stunning to me. I don't understand how SWIFT could even rationalize having secure financial messaging services, not just for designated North Korean banks, but for any North Korean banks whatsoever. I mean, it looks like their response to the UN was, well, the Belgian government said that it was okay for us to get thousands of dollars in fees. It's not, I just simply don't understand, as you said, given their experience with Iran, how they could justify a country that is the U.S. has designated as a primary money laundering concern, that they would even provide any kind of services to North Korean banks.
Who owns SWIFT? Who runs it?
It's an international consortium. I think it's mostly owned by the banks, but I was on their website today, and you can still see some of the North Korean banks on that website. I think they've certainly read it over the weekend. I would also point out that this could possibly be a violation of U.S. law. And so I think given their experience with Iran, you would think that they would have known better than to provide these services to North Korea. But it is part of a larger concern, which is I think most people expect or believe that North Korea is isolated from the financial community, and they are not. Whether they're using China to process U.S. dollar transactions through the United States, or they're using front companies in other countries to access the international financial system. And that's what we need to be doing more of. With Iran, we were on them multiple times, designating more and more front companies, and we're just not doing that on North Korea.
I've read every book on North Korea, which is about 3, Anthony, and it's a country that you wonder every time we dig in, how do they continue to exist? I mean, every major dictatorship in the world tends to get toppled over time, but this family has been able to hold on for 60-some years. What's it going to take to get real change in North Korea, and how the hell they held on so long? It's an economy from 100 years ago.
Agreed on that point. I think the primary issue here is that the North Korean regime doesn't care about its people. All that money that we're talking about here is going to their strategic programs and to the elites. And they are able, the report over the weekend said they were able to get significant revenue from this mechanism. And how they've been able to survive is we are not closing these loopholes and these gaps to start to pressure the regime. I think people expect that we're doing that, but we're not.
That leads me directly to a question that seems obvious here. Do sanctions work?
Well, they're not working now because they're not well enforced.
But I can't think of a case where the sanctions have really achieved the objective. I mean, they didn't particularly work with Iran.
Well, they worked with Iran in terms of getting them to the negotiating table. I think that was the ultimate goal. We can have a debate of whether that's the deal itself is what we were looking for, but the goal was to get them to the negotiating table.
Would it help if the Chinese actually enforce the sanctions? I can't tell if the Chinese government willfully looks away or it just pretends not to know from this report, but they could do more, couldn't they?
Exactly. I mean, given China's security services, it's hard to believe that millions of dollars of U.S. dollar transactions are occurring, and the Chinese know nothing about it. They'll claim they know nothing about it. They'll blame everybody else, but it's clear that the Chinese government has to be aware of. The banks themselves, the Chinese banks, are the ones responsible. They have to know, or they should know, what is going on with their transactions, and they have to do more to stop it.
Anthony, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Anthony Ruggiero.